Welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I am your host, Matt Duraldi, doing a solo episode today. Trevor's got some big news on the horizon that I'm sure he'll be excited to share once he rejoins the show. But today we're going to be going through the top 30 quarterback rankings for week 2. All right, so kicking things off, we know you're starting Allen, we know you're starting Hurts, Lamar, Mahomes, Richardson, Stroud, Kyler. Those are all locked and loaded, whether you're in a SuperFlex league or standard league, even if you're in like an 8-team league. Side note, if you're in an 8-team league, please change your format to SuperFlex because that's just ridiculous. But wanted to talk a little bit about number 8, Jaden Daniels. So from a fantasy perspective, he had a very good debut. He ran the ball quite a bit, which is why fantasy managers drafted him as high as he did. From a real life perspective, in my opinion, the jury's still out. I don't think he looked all that great. I don't think Cliff Kingsbury is all that good of an offensive coach. I know he's been kind of tied to some of the higher profile quarterbacks throughout his career, but to me, I think they've got a lot of things to work out. But this week, he's got a cupcake matchup against the Giants. So I would be starting him in all formats. And the upside that his rushing provides just can't be understated. Plus, I think against New York, it gives him a chance to get some confidence throwing the ball as well. One of his biggest assets in college was throwing that slot fade deep to two of the best college receivers in Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr. So that helped quite a bit, but I would like to see him air it out a little bit more. I think they're going to try to get some confidence in his arm, but I think he's a locked and loaded start. Got Dak at number 9 going up against New Orleans. We'll see how good New Orleans actually is. Obviously, their defense looked great against Carolina, but so would my high school defense against Carolina last week. So, but I think with the way that Brandon Cooks looked, I think we'll see a better performance from CeeDee Lamb. We know they want to throw the ball. Hopefully Ferguson doesn't miss time. It's kind of weird. At first it looked like a season-ending injury. Then it looked like IR. Now they're saying he might possibly play. So definitely keep an eye on that. But definitely a sure start in all formats. Tua, he's got Buffalo Thursday night. I think with this, I would expect it to be a high-scoring game. We know that with Hill and Waddle, you can throw them a 5-yard pass and they can score from pretty much anywhere on the field. So I would, again, expect him to rack up some pretty high yardages. And we're not 100% sure if Achane and Mostert are going to be starting this game. So they might have to air it out even more. So I think he's in a pretty good spot this week. Looking over at number 11, Matt Stafford, he had a decent game against Detroit. Unfortunately, they lost that game close there at the end, but he's got a very good matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. Would expect a high-scoring affair here. As you can see, we listed Kyler at number 7. So hopefully those guys are going back and forth. Even without Puka Nacua, that's obviously a tough blow, but Cooper Kupp looked great. They've got some guys that hopefully can fill in. Obviously not to Puka's standards, but hopefully they can perform admirably and McVay can get this offense humming. Looking at number 12, Baker Mayfield just has an outstanding week 1. Super stoked for him. McMillan's looking like a true number 3 to complement Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So he's got great weapons. He's got Rashad White. He's got Bucky Irving. I think Baker, we might see him get pushed up even higher rest of the season. So excited to see how he plays against the Lions. Brock Purdy, he's got a good matchup against Minnesota. Not too great of a defense. We saw Purdy have not the best game against the Jets, but the Jets are such a tough defense to compare to the Vikings that I would expect a solid bounce back from him. Justin Fields coming in at number 14. So this was kind of a surprise start of week 1. Russ obviously was a little bit more banged up than they probably let on. And Fields played okay. I mean, Fields' value comes from his legs, right? I think long are the days of Ohio State where we just watch him throw like the cleanest 50-yard pass you've ever seen. If you haven't seen that pass to Chris Olave, it was one of the best throws I've ever seen from the college level. So Fields this week, he's got Denver. Denver stinks. I wouldn't expect a whole lot in the air from Fields, but he's shown that he can be such a valuable fantasy asset on the ground, and kind of viewing him similarly to Jaden Daniels, right? Like their value is going to come from their legs. So it'll be interesting to see how they do week 2 against Denver. I would expect a win from them just because their defense, especially, is so good. Justin Herbert's got a great matchup against Carolina. I guess the hesitation would be for folks not wanting to push Herbert up the board too high is they're going to, grind it out on the ground against the Panthers. But in my opinion, just kind of having the receivers look the way they did week 1, I think Harbaugh is going to want Herbert to continue to establish and grow the rapport with his receivers. It's looking like Ladd is going to be the number 1. We talked about that a lot throughout the offseason. So hopefully you got Ladd on some of your teams. Palmer looked okay. Quentin Johnston was on the field, but I would expect him to target Johnston a few times, try to get his confidence up, try to get Palmer a nice catch on the outside, and continue to just feed Ladd. So I like Herbert this week. And again, a game they should win. Joe Burrow, he's probably the toughest one to rank because from a talent perspective and things like that, he's much higher than this. But he just starts so bad. And he played awful last week. He's got a very tough Kansas City defense. So I kind of want to push him even lower, to be honest with you. And Burrow's one of the guys that we talked about in our trade targets video where he notoriously starts slow. Inquire about him now. If he has another stinker of a game against the Chiefs, like maybe you can get him on the cheap in SuperFlex because we know that he finishes a lot stronger, assuming health of him and his teammates. Looking over number 17, Aaron Rodgers, decent matchup against the Titans. A lot easier than going up against the 49ers, so I would expect a decent game from Rodgers. I thought he looked fine against San Francisco, to be completely honest with you. Obviously not the best statistical game, but who had that week 1? Cousins, I'm concerned about. Not so much the matchup against Philadelphia, but just how bad he looked against Pittsburgh on the whole. Pittsburgh's obviously got a good defense as well, but I don't know. Cousins, he ran no play action. He took 1 snap from under center, and it was like a spike. And he just looked completely immobile. I don't know. I don't know if it's leaving Kevin O'Connell's system or if there was jitters or if he's more hurt than we expect. But I'm concerned about Cousins this year. I'm very happy in the league that I have with Trevor. He took Cousins over Stafford. I had Stafford over Cousins, and Stafford ended up falling to me. So we'll see how that kind of shakes out through the season because we've got a little $5 bet going on that. Looking at number 19, Caleb Williams. First game was just atrocious, looked horrible, did not look like the first overall pick. Luckily, they won that game, so some of the pressure's kind of off him, at least for now. But he's got the whole state of Illinois kind of riding on his shoulders. They're probably sick of hearing about how every quarterback Green Bay drafts just turns into absolute gold, where Chicago can't get anything right. So I have high hopes for Caleb in the long run. I just hope he looks better than he did week 1. This should be a decent scoring affair against Houston. We know Houston's going to put up points even against a decent Chicago defense. So hopefully he starts to get his confidence up. Trevor Lawrence, number 20. Cleveland's, a good defense. They've obviously got Myles Garrett and some other strong playmakers. But the problem is Cleveland's offense is so bad that, I don't think their offense is going to be on the field a whole lot, which could gas their defense. So I think with Lawrence, he's got some good weapons. We saw Brian Thomas Jr. kind of emerge. Hopefully is that number 1. We've talked about that at length, trying to get Brian Thomas Jr. on your team, how we expect him to be the number 1. So hopefully that rapport continues to improve because not many people are built like Brian Thomas. And if Lawrence is going to have a good year, it's going to be relying on him heavily. Geno Smith had a decent week from a fantasy perspective, kind of salvaged by that rushing touchdown. But against New England, I do not want to start him this week. They're a tough defense. He's playing in New England, traveling across the country. I think Geno's going to have a very good year. I've talked about this quite a bit under that new offensive system. But I am sitting him this week. I actually had to make that decision. I have Stafford and Fields in my SuperFlex spots, and then I've got Geno on my bench. Derek Carr, he's got a tough Dallas opponent. I think Dallas is going to try to get after him a little bit. I would expect a turnover or 2 in this game after what was just a breeze of week 1. I would expect Carr to kind of come back down to earth. But I think where he's ranked and in deeper Superflex leagues, like if you're in a 12-team league, like you might be faced with this decision. And, there's something to be said about riding the hot hand. Like Derek Carr has been okay throughout his career. We've seen he can hit on the deep ball. So if you have to play him, go ahead, because I would not want to start this next guy, Deshaun Watson. He looked so bad. I cannot explain how bad Deshaun Watson looked. He salvaged his point total with like some rushing yards, but he seems like he's already losing the locker room. We saw a new case against him come to light the day after that game. Like, you think that was a coincidence now that the wheels are kind of falling off? So I think we're witnessing the final demise of Deshaun Watson. I think people are done making excuses for him. They're done thinking that the player that he was in Houston is going to be the player that is still in there. It's not going to happen. I think he's going to get benched at some point. They've got Jameis Winston behind him, and if you want to talk about a locker room guy on the polar opposite end of the spectrum, Jameis Winston can galvanize a team. He's hilarious. He's going to give it his all. He's going to turn it over quite a bit, but Watson was like 0 for 9 on passes over 15 yards. It's like 15 yards. Are you kidding? That's like a little chip shot in golf. That's nothing. That's pathetic. So don't start Watson. I'm probably going to have to think about cutting him soon. Maybe grab Winston if you're in a deeper league and just kind of stash him if you have the roster space, kind of a speculative ad. Kind of similar to with the next guy, Daniel Jones, just horrible. Could not have looked worse. Drew Lock's probably going to be the starter at some point, which I think is good for everyone. Not that Drew Lock is like this savior, but we saw, him step in last year in Seattle. He won that game in the rain with that, last minute touchdown to Jackson Smith and Jigba. So he's got a little bit of a gamer in him. Sam Darnold, number 25, had a great week 1. I was so happy to see it. As I went to the same high school as him, I'm a USC fan, so I've always kind of been a Darnold homer, for better or worse. So I'm happy that he's in a new system with Kevin O'Connell, with Justin Jefferson. I think this finally might be the time where he can be a solid starting quarterback in the NFL. If you can't tell, I'm definitely a homer. But unfortunately, he's got San Francisco this week. So sit him if you can. If he puts up a decent game against San Francisco, I'm not talking about a win. I'm talking about no turnovers, solid ball movement, looks decent. He's going to be pushed up quite a bit moving forward. Bryce Young, again, don't start him. Could not have looked worse. Very unfortunate to see. I thought Dave Canales was going to have this offense turned around quite a bit. Maybe it's just week 1. Maybe it's the fact that they had absolutely nothing going on the ground and they can't wait to get Jonathan Brooks back fast enough. But man, I already cut him in a Superflex league. Like it was pathetic out there. It was horrible. Looking over at number 27, Jacoby against Seattle. Don't start him. Honestly, I would start number 28, Minshew, over Jacoby, just because I trust in Minshew's weapons more than Jacoby, to be honest. I know they're playing Baltimore and they're going to get crushed. I'm not saying start Minshew. I'm just saying if I was on the clock and had to make that decision, I would probably go with Minshew and just hope that he feeds Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers. And, Brock Bowers had a good game too, which is super exciting. Looking at number 29, Bo Nix. I've been off the Bo Nix train for 6 or 7 years. I can't remember how long ago he started at Auburn, but I just couldn't handle any of this. Like, he's our savior now that it's been X amount of years since Cam Newton's gone and he's a family legacy, blah, 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 blah. Oh, he goes to Oregon and he's so great. I'm like, this guy is just not that good. So don't start Bo Nix. Don't have him on your rosters unless you absolutely have to. He's got Pittsburgh this week. I would expect him to get eaten alive out there. We saw what Pittsburgh did against a much better Kirk Cousins. So don't start him. Will Levis, I guess I would probably start Will Levis over Bo Nix, just thinking about it. But he's got the New York Jets, and D-Hop is banged up. Sauce is going to be all over Calvin Ridley. Like, I don't really see any path to a good game unless he like barrels in with a rush TD or hits on like a 50-yard strike, which with his arm strength, like, is always a possibility. But who is he going to throw that to? Unless Ridley gets loose against Sauce Gardner, of course. So that's it. That's the top 30. Thank you guys so much for watching. If there's anything, that you guys want to see, a deeper dive into any of these guys, just let us know in the comments because, like we've mentioned before, this is more of a Superflex focused channel. So a lot of you guys are going to be kind of making those start-sit decisions from the 13 through 30 range. So if you want a deeper dive, just let us know in the comments, and we'll be happy to go a little bit deeper next week. Thanks so much for watching.